Hello, welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to be moving on with this weekend, doing some more special selections before starting up next week's theme on Monday, which is instrumentals. Today's request comes at us from Simon, who says Motionless in Oceania, the Moth Gatherer studio version on YouTube is great. Looking forward to it. I don't know why this band and song give me such a hard time talking. So it's the Moth Gatherer, and the song is Motionless in Oceania. And yeah, let's get into it. I don't know what we're in for here. Let's go. Alright, so I think we're in 7, but there isn't any real strong sense of downbeat, any strong rhythmic direction. Really hard to find one. Maybe like a 9/4, maybe not 7/8, maybe like a 9/4. I don't know. So real heavy, just sitting in this pocket of weight, real low end stuff. Not a really strong final resolution chord. It actually kind of bleeds back to chord 1. Alright, so this is in 4 though, so I'm wondering if we were just in a very syncopated 4 in the intro. So either that synth sound wasn't a downbeat like I had thought, or we started this section on the end of 1, which makes the whole thing feel disjointed, or I don't know, disconnected of sorts. It's rhythmically kind of all over the place. this is 4/4, it's got to be like a 32 bar phrase before it lines back up. But it is really nice how groovy it is, despite not really sticking to a strong sense of time. Yeah, this is 7 though. Yeah, we got a 4 and a 3 back to back. And I love how the high end always comes in and lifts every section that it's in up. Really nice textural atmosphere here. Lots of grit and grain on the guitars. And if you follow those cymbals, we move to a 6. So these guys are all over the place with time, and I'm really enjoying how it's keeping me on my toes. I also like how the 6 works against the dotted quarter notes that's kind of filling up the ambientness, and it creates this back and this 1-2. Nice, real big outro here, I think. Yeah, so there's some really cool polymeter going on in there, where I can feel both the 6 pulse and the 4 pulse. Very cool. And I like how that outro sort of has, like it's sparse compared to what we've had before. There's very little instrumentation. I think there was a synth in the guitar and that was it. But it still feels large. It's empty, it's hollow, but it's this large kind of hollow. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way that the guitar is engineered and modified by, the amps and the cabs and all the pedals and all that. Really cool. I want to go back to that section though. This is unusual. I don't typically bring the song back. But that final section, I kind of want to point out the 4 and the 6 because it is very cool. I love that section. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's on the cymbals. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the snare and bass kick are kind of pushing that idea. So it's really cool how the drummer is driving both of those very strongly. It's not like I really have to listen for one over the other, or kind of have to, stop and really pay attention. I just kind of fell into both of those grooves really easily. They're both very prominently felt, and I think that's awesome because we went from what I was pretty sure was the 6/8 before that because of the cymbals. I don't think there was a strong 4 presence yet. And then he just brings in the snare and the bass and puts them in this 4 feel. And it all just comes together, and it's done at such a tempo that it feels like this swaying because the 6 can be felt in 2. And you notice when I was counting, I emphasized 1 and 4. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, and you get this bum, 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 and it's this nice, I don't know, weightlessness feeling. I think it's just because there's so much space between the defined beats, mixed with the fact that there's not a lot of rhythmic movement going on. The guitars are maybe doing something rhythmic, but it's all kind of coming together into a single sound. So even though they might be playing quarter notes, to my ear, it was mostly these long held out notes with these very legato sort of light attacks in them. And I couldn't tell if maybe my brain was just attributing that because there was these attacks in the drums and I really wanted the guitars to have it. I'm not really sure if they existed or not. um, but it just has this nice, almost like, I don't know, this bouncy feel to it, but this weightlessness. Just very cool. Very cool ending. So yeah, this is an interesting song because on the surface, if you were to describe this song to me, probably something along the lines of a wall of sound, post-rocky kind of idea with harsh vocals pushed down into the mix and occasional melodic elements rising to the top with frequent time changes. I'd probably write it off as something not for me. I'd give it a shot. That's what I do. I listen to music at least once before, figuring out if it's for me or not. But it's probably not something I'd go into with very high expectations of enjoying. And I've come out on the other side of this really digging what's going on. And I think a lot of that comes down to the two main things that I think they do very well. And that's atmosphere and groove. Especially groove in the face of time changes. Now, it is very possible, I've mentioned before, that time signatures are not some sort of set in stone thing. It's more of a way for the composer to inform the musicians or the conductor what the feel of the bars should be. A song written in 4/4 is going to, on paper, without knowing what the intentions are, feel differently than a song written in 5/4. However, you could still write in 5/4 and emphasize every other beat. So you would emphasize beats 1, 3, 5, 2, 4. And that would give you a 4/4 feel in 5/4. You could also write a 4/4 melody line. If it's in 5 bars, you get 20 beats, you can write that in 5/4 in 4 bars. It's still 20 beats. So time signature doesn't really do much other than convey intention from the composer. So I mentioned a lot over the course of this reaction about these different time signatures that I was feeling. Or more so, I was talking about pulses. However, I did name a couple of time signatures specific because it's less about a pulse and more about an idea of framing melody lines. But nothing I say is really set in stone. It's more of how I would write it, how I'm feeling it, and how I would transpose that rather than it being set in stone. For all I know, the song was written in 4/4, every bit of it. And they just put in all these polymeter and polymetric ideas to change the feeling of it without actually changing the time signature. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the time feels that go on in here. And some of that may be time signature changes. Some of it may be completely just the way the song felt at the time rather than an actual change in time signature. I don't know how they wrote it. And since they wrote it for themselves, they don't really need to indicate intention because they are both the composer and the musician. They don't need to write down what they mean when they write something. They're going to be the ones reading it. They know what they meant. Um, so the time feel though is very interesting. They play around with it a lot, and they do a ton of dancing around downbeats, or should I say, dancing around emphasized downbeats. They do tend to play on downbeats occasionally, but there's not really any downbeats that's given any emphasis to prescribe a pulse to the song. At the beginning, we have this highly accentuated rhythmic pattern in the guitars and maybe the drums too at that point. I don't remember. But it's the opening riff. And I mentioned that I didn't really know what the time signature was because I couldn't find one, and that is because they really don't emphasize any beats. They play around downbeats and offbeats, and then they don't emphasize any beat either, so there isn't really any sort of heartbeat to the song. It is just a rhythmic pattern that exists, and as far as I was concerned, it felt like free time, honestly, because there's just no emphasized downbeats. If I could get an emphasized beat and then a bit of silence and an emphasized beat and then what feels like two bits of that same length of silence, I could say, hey, we're in 5, right? We got to emphasize 1 and 3, de-emphasize 2, 4, and 5. That's a fairly regular pulse for 5/4. But without any sort of emphasis, I really have no idea what is a downbeat, what is an offbeat, what is an intentional primary beat, something that would indicate the rhythmic feel of the song, and they really don't provide that in some parts, and it gives these situations a sort of weightlessness, timelessness, just kind of drifting along. Um, so it's just kind of carefree, letting the tide take you, kind of idea. And it's kind of cool how that lines up a bit with that weightlessness I mentioned at the end of the song when we were actually 2 times when we were doing some polymeter stuff. Um, but I tie all this in because I mentioned that even though they created these ideas of timelessness, of free flowing time, of not really having these constrained ideas of time signature or time feel, there's still a ton of groove in there, right? You can still just kind of bob your head. You don't know what you're bobbing to, and sometimes you might have to, have a little hiccup to catch up, or maybe emphasize, bob on some offbeats or whatever. But it really isn't hard to get into a bit of a groove, just kind of jamming along with the song. And that is a skill, 100%. It is not easy to create timelessness where people can feel time but not know that they're feeling time, or not know that they're not feeling time. It is remarkable, I would say. And I just really appreciate the skill and execution there in creating that opening section. You can just tune your brain out and jam to it and bob your head, and you will probably find yourself really enjoying the situation you're in and not really feeling like you don't know when to move your head. But I'm trying to figure out what's going on there and I can't. So they've done this thing where it's an enigma that you can still feel, you can still see, you can still hear, and that's just phenomenal. Like I said, that is not easy to do. Um, and then we move throughout a couple ideas. We enter into a 4, we enter into a 6. There's a 7 somewhere in the middle, and then we did a 6, and then we ended with the 6 from that section into a 6+4 or 6 against 4 kind of idea, and ended from there. And it's phenomenal how they can keep the song groovy. That, like I said, groove is kind of one of their big things, as far as I'm concerned. Keeping odd time signatures or odd rhythmic ideas groovy, and not really losing the groove, allowing the listener to just kind of sit in there and enjoy where the song takes them, despite the song being a bit chaotic rhythmically. The other thing that really stands out to me is atmosphere. I couldn't really tell you too much of what the guitars were doing or the synth was doing throughout the song. A lot of it was just holding out these really long notes, There's a couple melody lines that kind of sat above everything in the mix. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit because the mix is something that intrigues me. It's very different than what I'm used to, even though I'm getting used to this style of mix, but it still catches me off guard every time I hear something like this. Um, Dang, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Atmosphere. So we have the guitars. Like I said, I can't really tell what they were doing specifically. There was always something else that called my attention to it, but for the most part, they were playing these long notes. Like I said, they may have had some light attacks within them. Maybe they were eighth notes, maybe they were quarter notes, but just because of the mix that created this wall of sound idea, and because I think that the actual attacks were rather light, it always just kind of felt like one long note to me. Sort of like this sort of slowly metamorphosizing musical idea. The chords kind of changed, but you never really heard when they changed. They just kind of fused into the next idea. And yeah, their attention to textural layering and textural detail as far as the atmosphere is concerned is excellent. There is this maybe a little bit of isolation in this song, as well as some ideas of, I don't know, just extreme weight and dissonance and tension and inability to move, but always being by yourself. I think that that loneliness really comes out at the end, which is probably how I'm coming to this conclusion. Maybe I'm retrospectively applying it back to what I remember about the song, but this wall of sound is not as large as we've heard some bands. Stuff like Cult of Luna does this wall of sound stuff, and it just sounds ridiculously wide. And here it's sort of a narrow wall of sound. I can still kind of pick out all the instruments. They're not really coming together as some sort of glob of sound so much, but it's definitely not an extremely clean mix that allows me to individually hear everything perfectly. It's like a glob that kind of has shapes of a guitar coming out of it every once in a while. You're like, oh yeah, that's a guitar, definitely. But then other times it's like, well, this is just, an emotion. This is an atmosphere. And yeah, they just find this way to create this complex idea. Like I said, a little bit of isolation, a little bit of tension, anxiety, loneliness, overwhelming weight. The song is heavy. There's some sections that provide some levity. That's usually when we have a nice melody line over the top. And I think those sections provide a bit of beauty and relief that the rest of the song desperately needs. As a listener, I've mentioned before, I'm not a real big fan of these super heavy, just pulling you down kind of style of songs. And having those moments of melody, higher range instruments, lines that kind of provide some levity to it, and give me at least a minute to breathe and let that weight come off my shoulders for a second is it's greatly appreciated. At least as a casual listener, the song definitely creates some anxiety and tension in me, and those moments tend to give me a little bit of relief from that, and I enjoy that. I don't like feeling tense and burdened all the time when I'm listening to a song. So we have that idea going on there. But aside from those melody lines, the song has this weight to it, all of it, up until I would say maybe the very end when we kind of hit that point where we have the outro, which I'd say is very sparse. So the song deals with a lot of these negative emotions of being burdened, stressed, anxious, but they provide these moments of levity, and I think there's an interesting contrast going on there. And I'm not sure if it's done purely for the music. Like I said, for me, I get some relief out of that, and maybe that's done because they know that this song is a bit on the heavier side. But maybe there's also a thematic element that I'm just not picking up here because the lyrics, I couldn't hear a single word of. And this is where we're going to start talking about the mix. Um, the I really wanted to hear some of these lyrics, Even if I only pick up a couple of words in the chorus or maybe a couple sentences in the chorus, I can kind of get an idea of what's going on, especially if I can get lucky enough to nab something that would be more of a thesis statement and kind of wrap up any thematic ideas into a single statement, which tend to pop up in choruses. But I got nothing. The vocals are pushed way down into the mix. The growls are almost incomprehensible. There's a lack of enunciation, which I've noticed is just kind of a thing with growling. I've pointed out a few times, especially during Awesome Growls Week, when there are growlers with very strong enunciation, and it really helps me hear what they're saying. Being able to hear distinct syllables goes a long way into understanding language, and growling already is going to distort some of those syllables and syllabic pauses. So you really need to enunciate more when you're doing growling, but I also understand that the sort of growling that we see here in the Moth Gatherer is just sort of par for the course. It is the sound for the style. So yeah, just between being pushed down in the mix and then not having strong enunciation, vocal patterns to the growls, I couldn't pick up a single word, and it ended up making the vocals more of another texture in everything, which, as I've been told many times, that's how a lot of people listen to this style of music. The vocals are just another instrument, just another texture to add to the atmosphere of the sound, which is more or less usually why they're growls as well, because you get the extra compression texture um, rather than the clean vocal style. You get the crackles and stuff that you're going to get from the compression on it, which is a textural thing, which is going to help your atmosphere. But like I said, it's something I'm still not real used to. Um, I like my melody lines to be given spotlight. I can't imagine anything outside of an avant-garde jazz solo where the soloist is buried by the band. If you have a melody line, you're usually given a little bit more prominence, and that's just something I'm used to, having decades of listening to classical and jazz and mainstream pop and rock. I'm just very used to melody lines being the center of attention. Not necessarily boosted way up like we tend to see in modern pop, but at least given a little bit of room for the melody to be heard. And it's just something much like growling or harsh elements in music, or some, well, not all harsh elements, but these harsher elements that I'm starting to hear in some of these heavy bands. It's just something I have to get used to. So those are my thoughts on the Moth Gatherer's Motionless in Oceania. Oceania? I don't know, man. I'm pretty sure I said that word right at the beginning, but it's looking real weird to me now. Oceania. Motionless in Oceania. It feels like there's too many syllables for so few letters. um, yeah, so it's an interesting song that has me intrigued. I think that's my big takeaway. They do a lot of really cool things that catch my mind critically, and I'm really digging some of the atmosphere work going on. And I do enjoy those little moments of those brief moments, unfortunately, of melodic levity. I would not mind listening to more stuff like this. This may be a good gateway to get me into heavier music just because of some of the more technical aspects to it that keep my brain uh, intrigued and thinking outside of letting myself focus on the harsher elements I'm not that big of a fan of right now. That's where you guys come and know. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know if you enjoyed this or not. Anything that's stuck out to you or maybe bounced off you. Maybe something I didn't touch on. When you're done with that, you can head up to the description box, check out the Linktree link. Everything is in there adjacent to the channel. If you want to check out the Patreon, the Twitter, the Discord, all those links are in the Linktree. Right above that, you can like, subscribe, or ring the bell. I'll be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC with next week's Instrumental Week. We did Instrumental last year, I think. Maybe earlier this year. It's been a while since we've done Instrumental Week, and I'm excited to get back. I love instrumental music, especially since I don't really get a chance to listen to vocals on a first listen anyways. So all it does is remove one piece of the equation. I can really focus on what the music means thematically instead of trying to tie it into some lyrics that I only picked up on half of, if even that sometimes. Really excited about that. All right, well, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.